Okay, good afternoon. Just to be clear about our format, we have heard from the three top officials in the city of Troy, the mayor, the city council president, and the chief of police. The Rensselaer County District Attorney was ill yesterday, day before yesterday, and was unable to join us. We'll hope to have another conversation with her soon. Because of the pandemic, of course, we weren't able to stage an in-person conversation. So instead, I was asked to pose the questions to the officials from a long list that had been drafted by a group of concerned citizens, including a half dozen people that we're about to hear from. So we will now hear the thoughts of those citizens in response to the public officials. I'll introduce each participant and then try to guide this conversation, but we will start with a short statement from each in alphabetical order. But let me say this by way of sort of picking up where the public officials left off and perhaps stimulating some reaction. While I was grateful that the officials had obviously given the issue of racism and justice some thought, because after all, they knew they were signing up for a panel called The Time of Reckoning, Confronting Systemic Racism, Seeking Justice, and Reimagining Society. That is the title of this program, sponsored by the New York State Writers Institute and the Center for Law and Justice and the Justice Center of Rensselaer County. So while they obviously had given the issue of racism and justice some thought, there were answers that frankly surprised me. And notably this, while Mayor Patrick Madden talked about the role of racism in all of our lives, the police chief and the city council president both denied that systemic racism exists at all in the Troy Police Department. And that frankly wasn't what I'd expected to hear in 2020, especially not in light of what the chief said later when I pressed him on this, that Troy cops get training in implicit bias. Of course, if you don't recognize a problem, then it's not surprising that you don't have solutions in mind for that supposedly non-existent problem. So I suspect that we'll hear differing views today, and that's as good a starting point, I think, as we might have for the next hour of conversation. So let me start by introducing Jessica Ashley. Jessica is a community activist in Troy for more than 40 years. She's worked for more than 30 years in human services. She has degrees in human services and chemical dependency. She spent 5 years on the Troy Police Objective Review Board, and she was previously the president, now is the vice president of the Troy NAACP. So let's hear some introductory thoughts from Jessica Ashley. Jessica?
Hello. I just want to clarify, I am second vice at this time of NAACP. In reference to the statement that was made by chief of police and council regarding racism, the major problem is if they don't know that they are a part of a racist system, then the problem is far worse than we even thought. And that's my input for now.
Okay, that is a good and direct starting point, I must say. The problem is much worse than we thought. Let me go next, since I said we'd go in alphabetical order, we'll go to Robert Doherty, who is the president of the newly formed Justice Center of Rensselaer County, a sponsor of this event. Bob is a Vietnam-era veteran, where he was a military police officer. He worked in hospital-based addiction and behavioral health treatment in New York City, where he was born and raised, and in Rochester and Albany. And he's a Troy City Council member representing the downtown district, where he chaired the Public Safety Committee. Robert Doherty, next.
Thank you very much, Rex. I want to make clear I'm a past council member.
Right.
As I witnessed the officials panel, the chief and his remarks were flatly delivered, but regarding structural and other types of racism applying to Troy PD, I think his view is a serious misjudgment. It requires an absence of the awareness of history, our culture, both recent and distant events. I was disappointed in his remarks and frankly, gobsmacked. We have the Thevenin case, the Davis case, the Larkin case, the recent dog handler problem, the Foley case, the Hooley case. It goes on and on. We have a long history of difficulties. In the Thevenin case, the AG's report includes this statement. In the light of witnesses' testimony, the available physical evidence, the PSI report, Sergeant French's account cannot be regarded as a reliable narrative of the immediate circumstances surrounding the shooting. The Justice Center of Rensselaer County will be posting our view of the Thevenin case, and we conclude the shooting was not justified. We're also working on constructive recommendations and other information that will accompany the publication of that conclusion. Progress in the Troy PD is most likely to occur when strong command structures are reflected in good order and discipline in day-to-day management. Discipline could be certain, proportionate, and timely, should be. Incidences or problems could be viewed as improvement opportunities and shared responsibilities of the force from top to bottom. Dialogue within and outside of Troy PD could be open, fact-sharing, and non-defensive. I'm the salt in the panel mix today, and as such, I will be sparse. My fellow panelists bring with them 400 years of cultural, historic, successful efforts to survive and prevail. They contribute, as they always have, their hopes and their brilliance. To the chief, I say this: in 25 years, we will be a minority. For the sake of my great-grandchildren and your grandchildren, I certainly hope we found our way to hear each other and to make more progress on reducing racism. To any and all, our nation just said, and I say, Black Lives Matter. I also want to commend the mayor and note his skill in appropriately describing racism and the multiple effects and varied aspects of our lives day to day. But we need to match that awareness with action. We've known for more than 15 years that body cameras reduce both payments out and incidences. And yet we have not gotten body cameras on our own police. We need to be more rapid in the application of improvements and more direct in our confrontation of racism. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Bob. We'll come back to some of those issues shortly. Let me turn next to Deborah Garrett, also a former member of the Troy City Council. She co-chairs an advocacy group for parents in the New York State Charter Schools Association, considers herself a huge advocate for Black and Brown education, both students and teachers, to, she says, disrupt the school to prison pipeline. So let's bring in Deborah Garrett for some opening thoughts.
I just want to say I appreciate for being a part of this panel. Listening yesterday, I had to go back and listen to the recording over today just to get some clarification for myself before speaking. And I felt like the fact that the systematic racism question, everybody didn't just say yes, that it exists, because it's not even just a Troy thing, it's a world thing, right? So there's things that is going to start higher than Troy City, the Troy City. So when the police chief made the statement that he doesn't think racism exists, and I'm assuming that he didn't understand the question. I'm assuming that the mayor didn't understand the question. I'm going to also assume that Carmela didn't understand the question, because overall, we all know that systematic racism exists. We also know that it's not just a one person stop doing it and it's going to stop everywhere. It's a layered thing, right? So we also know that by it being a layered thing, we have to do our part. And so when he said that the Troy police didn't have any racism in it, I don't know if he understood the question or if he took it as a personal attack, or that he was saying like he's personally not racist, excuse me. So I'm gonna give them the benefit of the doubt to maybe have the question re-asked, and maybe somebody should give them the definition of what systematic racism is, because I don't really understand if they understood what was being asked. If one of their children was to be arrested and one of my children was to be arrested for the same exact crime, you will automatically see what path is going to initially, happen with the two children. And with that being said, I think that they may not understand what systematic racism is. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt to maybe sit down with somebody, do some research, so that they can understand what that is. Because that, out of everything that was said yesterday, that made me really uncomfortable, and kind of scared and alarmed that you would live here in this city, in any city, honestly, and think that systematic racism, doesn't exist. So, that's my stance on it. Like I said, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt to maybe do some research, get the definition, Google it, Wikipedia somebody, so they can understand like what exactly that term is.
All right. Thank you, Deborah. That's interesting notion. Again, we're continuing in alphabetical order, so let's get just some opening thoughts from DeQuetta Jones. DeQuetta is an executive level in a New York state agency. She's a community advocate, mentor, philanthropist, who's been active for many years in gender, racial, and social justice and equity issues. Born in Miami, she lived in San Antonio. I did too, DeQuetta. And she's lived in Troy since 2008. So some thoughts from DeQuetta Jones.
Thank you, Rex. And again, I just want to thank, I'm just happy to be a part of this discussion and to have been thought of to be a part of this esteemed panel, which I have a respect for every single last one of them. My response is very short and brief. I was very disappointed. However, I am not surprised. This is the same old, same old. I also agree with Deborah, Jessica, and Bob regarding their reactions to the officials panel. Especially when asked the question about systemic racism and not directly answering the question as it relates to the city of Troy, but speaking of it at a national level and a global level. So that was a way to not answer the question. The other thing is, recently there was a Black former police officer that filed a civil suit against the Troy Police Department, and he alleges systemic racism within the Troy Police Department, as well as gave some very details about his experience working for the Troy Police Department. And I believe when he started in 2007, he was only one of 4 Black or African-American police officers that work there. And we know that right now there's between 119 and 130 police officers. And within Troy Police Department workforce, and when you look at the percentage of how many of those individuals that look like majority of us that's on the panel, such as Deshawn, Jessica, Luz, Deborah, and myself, it is very disproportionate. And I am just really, really concerned. The other thing that I'm concerned about is with the PBA, that the mayor did allude that there has been some discussions about making some changes with the police union, and that he would really prefer for there to be a buy-in. And I really just would like the mayor to really sit with that, because I don't think that if it was the mayor's children that were being killed in his city, that were being harassed, intimidated, not having that trust with the police department that I feel that his response will be a little different than how it is when we're talking about Black and brown people in the city of Troy community as it relates to Troy Police Department.
All right. Thank you, DeQuetta. We'll come back to some of those issues as well. Let's turn now for some opening thoughts to Luz Marquez-Benbow. Luz has been a national anti-rape advocate since 1998. Much of her work focused on national and state anti-rape policies. Locally, she is one of the founders of Troy for Black Lives, which was founded to demand police accountability. And in that role, she's one of the leading organizers of that terrific rally, June 7th, 2020, an historic 11,000 person rally for Black Lives in Troy. So let's hear some thoughts now from Luz Marquez-Benbow.
Thank you. And it is an honor and pleasure to be here with you. And I want to remind folks who are listening and those of us who are here that we're not here alone, and that Troy has a history of racism. And yesterday, while we were prepping for today, I mentioned Charles Nealy, and I mentioned him because in 1860, right downtown, the Troy Police Department was trying to apprehend Charles Nealy, who was a runaway enslaved person. He came up here from Virginia, and Harriet Tubman happened to be here. And her and what we call in the movement for Black Lives, comrades, were able to help protect Charles Nealy and free him. And that is the time of a reckoning that we're talking about in this moment. That is the time of reckoning that Black lives across this country, across this globe, in my homeland of Puerto Rico, are all calling for. The times of trying to get engagement are done. Edson Thevenin was shot and killed and murdered on Hoosick Street by Officer French. It was further covered up by the chief of police then, Tedesco. And then, as if that was not enough of a cover up, it went right up the chain to the mayor and to the district attorney's office, Abeloff, at that time. Dominique McDonald was shot in the middle of the day right on 9th Street in front of children during the summer. Thaddeus Faison was shot on North and on Central. These are just some of the folks, and added to some of the folks that Bob mentioned. And if racism doesn't exist, then why the heck is all of that happening to Black bodies? Most people think about racism as an act done from one person to another person. We're talking about systemic racism, in that which the very system of law enforcement lies on looking for runaway slaves. That is why it was formed. So if that's why it was formed, something needed to happen along the ways so that today we would be seeing something different, but we're not. We have a huge amount of Black and brown bodies inside prisons and jails across this country, and Troy is no different. If Troy were to be different, then Troy would be ahead of the time, and my poor city, who barely has income as a city and struggling, we would be out there making tons of money because our police department has all the best practices and tools for dealing with racism. You've got to be kidding me. You've got to be kidding me. And I would also add that while we Black Lives Matter across this country are focused on police, that's a systemic and a strategic move, because we're talking about breaking down systemic racism. So why not start with the protectors of that system? And that is law enforcement. And so when we're thinking about racism, and when those city officials are thinking about their response in the way that Deb is saying, y'all need to rethink this, they also need to rethink about how does it get played out, not just only by the criminal justice system, but by the educational system in Troy, by the healthcare system in Troy, by the housing system in Troy, by the economic system in Troy, There really needs to be a huge overhaul. And I want to speak to the disconnect that my neighbor, City Council Carmela Mantella, talks about, where she suspects that we, Troy for Black Lives, are disconnected from our community. I need to remind her, I live here. I've lived here. My husband has been born and raised here. He's a second generation born and raised in Troy. My in-laws moved here with a long history of some beautiful Black people from Greeleyville, South Carolina. And they made this their home. They raised their 3 children. We raised our 3 children in this city. So I don't know what community do they think that I am disconnected from, because we are not disconnected from that community. So I'm not surprised by how they answered, honestly. And then I also want to clarify that on June 7th, there was no involvement from police, from the mayor's office, or from the city council to do anything around any of the logistics for that day, which they say was a peaceful day. That day was peaceful because we, the people, we keep ourselves peaceful. And so I think in terms of racism, you know, I wish I could measure that by which you don't get to be a city council person, you don't get to be a mayor, you don't get to be a chief of police, because you have not at all gained any accreditation as to what does it mean to understand what white supremacy means, what systemic racism means, and what just the pure small term of racism means in this country. And so it's irresponsible, it's appalling, and it's embarrassing.
Okay, thank you, Luce. Let us move finally for an opening thought to Deshaun Moore. Deshaun is a relative newcomer to Troy, but he's an RPI graduate, a business owner, and an advocate for social justice and community building. Deshaun?
Well, yes, thank you guys for. I'm just happy to be here with these lovely women who have been.
And with Bob too, right?
Huh? Yes,
and Bob too.
And Bob, obviously. Thank you for acknowledging, you know, the 400 years of survival tactics. I don't think anybody can recognize. I think you polarized it really well in the fact that we have been able to survive some of the most extreme systematic oppression and still not really been given our flowers for still maintaining households and building infrastructures to survive. And so I thank you for that. But I'm here as support. I'm the young guy on the block, and I see these young women working in their prospective spaces, and I'm just in awe of how they are able to connect, build their communities, and raise families simultaneously. So I'm blessed to be here. My perspective is really coming from the young generation of Black business owners, alumni of RPI, and I've seen this city grow. I've seen this city develop some things infrastructurally for people to do what they need to do. However, there is still that whisper of why'd you start a business in Troy? And the first, as I'm, passing around the idea of having and starting a business in Troy and also living here, the word on the street is that we gotta watch out for those cops. And so for the very intro of the conversation was that, the mayor did I think the best he could as far as responding to that question, but the police chief failed in my, observation. And so I wanted to just, I'm here to just really identify, where we go from here, because obviously we're talking about future interaction, we're talking about representation, we're talking about accountability, and we're talking about allocations of funding that need to be, because systematic racism is the root, and economic depression is also the root. And so I'm really looking for infrastructure of systematic inclusion. I am here to invest in Troy. I'm invested in Troy because I am here, and I would like to see things be done in a fashion. I would like to see the women we have here held up and put in places to make decisions on our behalf. I want to see young people being activated in a way that is inspiring. We are sitting at the bottom of the hill where we have great thinkers and great minds on the top of the hill that can help and assist and have the resources and have the space to create real good dialogue and find out what's really going on between our young people and the police. And that has not been happening. We are not activating them, and we are not including them. So when the city's burned down and the smoke is filling the room, now we want to pay attention to our young people. And so I think we're all collectively tired of that narrative. I think Troy was, we were lucky that we had leaders like Luz and her team of critical thinkers to where it could have been the same way here. And so we have to acknowledge that, and we have to keep people like them happy. We have to keep them built up, and I'll keep it short because we're rolling, but we got a lot of things to cover, and I don't want to get hung up on intros.
No, that's great. Thank you. All of these are very useful in the conversation, and I want to just start by fundamentally kind of going back to something that Deborah said, that well, probably the chief didn't understand the question. Is there systemic racism in the Troy Police Department? Sounds simple enough. Maybe maybe it's a definitional problem. So can you all discuss and explain, perhaps, to help for the understanding, what does racism look like in Troy? What would it be that would need to be recognized for the chief to share your perspective on systemic racism? What is it here? Who would like to?
I got to tackle this one because I've been thinking about this one all day. The fact of the matter is this: if you go into the City Hall building right now, I really want people to do this, honestly. Go to City Hall and tell me how many people of color, Black, brown, Asian, you pick a color, that works in City Hall. To me, that's a problem. That's that's a systematic racism approach right there. The fact that we can count how many people are Black that's on the police force. The fact that I have heard several times, there has been 3, and I'm not counting Rodney, I'm counting 3 Black women that has been on the Troy City Council. And only 2 of them, excluding myself, have been actually been able to go and get voted in. The fact that you can count those people, that's a problem. You shouldn't be able to count how many people work in a school, how many Black teachers is at school too. And I mean teachers, not teaching assistants, I mean actual teachers who are paid a bill because they got a degree. Why is that a thing? Why do we have to count how many people are in a room that is of color? And I'll make this last statement. The fact that I was the only person of color that was on a board, being a politician, I guess, in the whole Rensselaer County, that's a problem right there. The only person of color, that's a huge problem. And this is no disrespect to David Basimba, but he only counted that he was Black after the fact. So I didn't even know he was Black until he mentioned it when we had a meeting. But I was the only Black woman, Black person that was sitting on a council or on a board for the whole Rensselaer County, not just the city of Troy.
One of the things I want to point out is that when we speak of systemic racism, think about the many African Americans that have to have the talk with their children. How many white families have to have the talk about how they are to position themselves if and when they're stopped by the police? as a mother and grandmother. At this stage of my life, I have a 6-month-old son, and now the grief, the concern, the fear that I had for my 34-year-old son, I now have to have for my 6-month-old grandson. I have to one day, if God should allow me to live, have to be prepared to advocate for him, to be vigilant, and to be sure that he is safe from the police. I never feared as a mother. I never feared my son being caught up in gangs and caught up in drug abuse, drug of any, or selling drugs or crime for that matter. My fear for my son was the police getting their hands on him. We have many people who are in the penal system, modern day slavery, not because they necessarily committed the crime that they were accused and found guilty of, because they weren't judged by their peers. The peers did not make that decision, but persons that were not like them, of their color, of their community, of their race. They were found guilty by virtue of the fact that they were Black, and they went to prison. They are in prison. We are feeding a racist system $40,000 to put a man in prison for a year, but you won't give up $5,000 for him to go to a community college. Those are the kinds of things. Those are the kinds of things that are going on right now. And so again, I want to say, because the bio that you gave, the most important part of my bio is I'm a mother and a grandmother. And when I saw George Floyd murdered, when I heard about Edson Thevenon's murder, it went into my soul, because I know the possibility of that happening to my son is as real today as ever.
I would actually like to jump in on that piece, because as a member of media, and obviously as you see, you guys as writers, you understand the spin. We talked a little bit about it yesterday in our preparation for this conversation. And there's a running theme. It's when we hear about an interaction between a suspect, that is a person of color, they are automatically peppered with negative claims, whether it be something they did when they was 2 years old, or something that they did when they were not mature enough to have an understanding of what life is really all about. And so I'm pretty sure that this was the same situation with Mr. Thevenon, where we heard that he had a gun on him. We heard that there was so there's this systematic, like, it's not just the police, it's the media around it. And so when the police say things and they're not factual with their presentation, the media runs with it, and it calms the nerves, or it really kind of incites, well, he should have got what he deserved. He should have stayed where he was at. He should have put his hands where he could see him. And even when all of those things happen and we follow those rules, we're still being attacked. We're still being addressed in a non-human way. And so just to piggyback and see, what has been going on all across the world, it is happening here. And it's getting shushed because the system is running quite well, because it stays a whisper. And so I think his neglect to acknowledge that there was some missteps in that initial conversation with the media is also what played a big part in the systematic cycle we play. And so I would like to acknowledge that they need to be wise with their words when they speak to the public and addressing young Black men and their interactions, because it could mean life or death. It could give a sentence by public opinion, and then that also plays part in the courts. And so This is not new. This is a game. And to acknowledge that, to not acknowledge that, I think was, immature.
And I just want to add, I'm an adult survivor of childhood sexual abuse and rape, and that is the work that I have, that's my purpose to work to end, and I've been doing since 1998. I know that in order for us to be safe, we have to see people's humanity, and we have to see people as equal participants of society. And when we don't see people as equal participants of society, then we demonize them. And specifically, I go to the movement that both I experience the pain of and both I work in, because that movement is often the movement that is pinned up against this idea of increasing mass incarceration because of domestic violence, because of rape, because of sexual assault. And I bring it up because oftentimes we teach our children to fear the unknown, to fear the darkness, to fear the strangers outside in the street, when in fact, 90% of abuse survivors are abused by people that they know and people right in their own community. And so we have this idea that issues like crime only happen in certain hotspots. And those certain hotspots in Troy, and what it looks like is down the hill. Deshaun referred to up the hill, down the hill. There's an understanding, there's a class understanding and a racial divide on Hoosick Street between who lives up on the hill and who lives down the hill. And if you even look at most of our public housing, with the exception of 2, many of them are hidden in little corridors that you have to know that they're there in order for you to know that that is public housing. That is all racism. Do you understand what I'm trying to tell you? I'm trying to make a link between that which we fear, or this idea of a false sense of security or safety, because we've taught our kids to fear the boogeyman, the unknown, the one that you don't see, the stranger, the Black people, right? The illegal immigrants, right? Who are here to rape and sexually assault people. I mean, we had a government for 4 years that literally moved on that concept that I hate to, that I'm sorry to say, my city officials sound just like Trump when they spear off this rhetoric. And they both represent the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. So, so this isn't a party thing. This is a white people in a white communities issue that has been on the backs of Black people in this country for too long. And we give people in society a false sense of reality or safety when we think that the police is going to keep them safe. The chief of police in Troy said racism does not exist. That translates for us, Black and brown people and illegal immigrants and gay people and trans people and people with mental health issues as you are not going to keep us safe because you are blind to the real issue of something that is actually systemic in this country, and you're blind to it, or you're choosing to be neglectful of it. And so you're not trying to keep us safe, you're trying to keep us in line. You know what I'm saying? And so you see the racism within the school district. We had one Black superintendent, probably lasted, I can't remember, probably 2 or 3 years. We have not had one since. We have some schools where there is no Black teachers or Latino teachers. There is federal civil rights legislation that says if you receive federal funding, you are required by law to have a certain percentage of the second largest language in your demographics to have access. You could go to the mayor's office, you can go to the website, you go to city council, everything is in English. We have a large Spanish-speaking population, and the 3rd largest language in this city is Arabic. There is no translation for that. If you go to the ER, you're given a piece of paper with all types of languages that are translated, and then you're given a phone. So if I were to be a rape victim and go to the ER and I only spoke Spanish, you're going to give me a piece of paper and a phone. and it's 2020. And so that is what racism looks like. Racism looks like my son in the 7th grade yelling at his teacher that Black Lives Matter, and she telling him no, all lives matter, and not having the maturity or the wherewithal to calm the conversation down and engage in a conversation with the students. None of that. That is what it looks like in Troy.
And next, what I would like to add is, I know often with these conversations, they can seem as if you're attacking. And I want to also make that distinction when we talk about systemic racism, especially when it comes to the criminal justice system. Carmela, the president of the city council, was arrested for driving while intoxicated, and it was road rage. She is still the president, and understanding that she was elected. However, if she was Black, I think that situation would have looked completely different. And that's just something for her to also think about, and to also see and acknowledge that it would have been a completely different response if she looked like me.
And in fact, it was, because that's literally what happened to Edson, so-called allegedly happened to Edson Thebin. And he was being stopped for supposedly a DWI. He proceeded to leave just like she did, except she was worse. And instead, he was shot at. He did not have a gun. He was unarmed. They checked his vehicle, everything. And so, indeed, that is exactly what happened.
That's
she
right.
got to live and be city council president.
That's right. And, somebody once said that, when we have these conversations a lot, somebody once said that when you are accustomed to privilege for so long, equity sounds like oppression. And that was just something that I wanted to put out there, because we're constantly having this conversation, which, Rex, it's exhausting as a Black person to have to keep having this conversation, to keep seeing Black lives just taken away. And then also being a parent of a 22-year-old, where of a son, a chocolate tall son, where I'm concerned sometimes about getting a phone call and my child has been killed, and then there is no accountability. His life is gone, and then he is painted and portrayed as this big, tall Black man, and he was aggressive. So that's another thing that they need to sit with. And I never want to have conversations and to attack people, the what sometimes we identify as the oppressor, or the white person that is in power, but they have to make the connection. They have to put themselves in our shoes to be able to move forward. And a lot of them just aren't. And it goes back to that when you have been accustomed to privilege for so long, that equity sounds like oppression.
It's a great point. Great line. Let me ask something about, you made reference to the fact that you can walk into City Hall and not see any person of color. And certainly that's true, especially of the police force, since we're especially kind of focusing on law enforcement here. What do you think it would take to get more Black, Indigenous people of color onto the Troy police force? How would that be possible? Any ideas there?
I think we're talking about understanding the testing process, understanding what needs a test and what doesn't need a test, and then breaking it down in a way that anybody can understand. We're talking about translations, we're talking about making it accessible, because right now no one is able to communicate and, you know, come up to the office as laissez-faire. And so I think we have to understand what it's going to take is going to take extra work. Like, for example, we're taking time out of our busy days from our families, businesses, and all the things that's going on personally with COVID, family members losing jobs, and having to manage and be the head of our households, and find out how I can get this job that's going to help me come out of my situation while working maybe 2 or 3 jobs. You know what I'm saying? And so we have to understand that there are so many ways to break down this information to make it palpable. And I work in media, so I understand that some people like to read, some people learn audibly, some people like video presentations, some people like to see the process kind of spelled out. And I think we're tired of going the extra mile to explain systematic racism, but it seems like everybody's tired of doing the extra work to get the access to resources. You know what I'm saying? And so that has always been our process. And like Dr. said, we're tired. We're losing sleep. We're trying to help our community. We're trying to be accessible, but we also got to take care and heal ourselves. And we're deteriorating just to do that process. So we need to see some tired eyes and some no sleep days from our elected officials to help this kind of translate in a way that's palpable for everybody.
Do any young men in the community actually want to be Troy cops? Do you think that they're, I say young men, listen to me, I'm sorry, as though
and women,
1955, but are there people who in the Black community who wish to be a part of the force even, or is that not something that anybody would want to?
I would like to share a view. First of all, our young people have witnessed, I personally, as a child, witnessed I couldn't have been any more than 2nd or 3rd grade going to school too. And I remember a cop calling my young brother, who was a year older than me, a little black bastard. That stuck. I'm 66 now. That stuck. I witnessed from childhood up to this to now, the police, the physical brutality. We talked about the killings, but there are countless beatings that don't even go reported. And I'm talking severe beatings. I'm talking my brothers have received it, and they've abused my son. We're talking about physical abuse. So in reference to your question, one of the things that needs to happen when we're trying to recruit or encourage, especially it starts in the school, the wrongdoing has first got to be admitted. Why would a child want to be a part of something? African children did not grow up wanting to be slave masters. They saw them as wicked, and that's something that stayed with you. Why would a child want to be evil? And that's what they see. So that's that part, that secret, if you will, something that you just don't talk about. We've got to talk about it. I think that's the beginning, because in order for there to be healing and for our young people to see this as something that they would want to be a part of, they've got to know that there's change. And the change starts with being honest with the fact that some terrible things have happened, are happening, and are being addressed. That's what this is all about. Okay. I mentioned last night in our meeting, the hospital. I took a person back to the hospital after he had been severely beaten by the police, and the hospital does not address the physical abuse that's brought to them by the police, they hardly record it. So you would not hear about it. So they're often, and these people end up going to jail. And so there aren't any pictures or any information to show you how people are physically brutalized by the police. It's secret. And they're spirited off to the county jail, and basically the rest of your treatment is there, and you're there, and your bruises heal and go away, and that's the end of it. So I just want to say that we have a generation that needs to know that these ugly things have happened. And somebody needs to take ownership of that. Someone needs to fess up, because if you're not going to be honest about it, again, the chief saying that racism, there's no racism on the police force. There's no way on God's earth that you can expect anyone to want to be a part of something like that when you're not even admitting that you got a serious problem in the department.
Right.
Can I answer in a different way, Rex?
Mhm.
And I want to say this, is that there was a police test that came out, and I remember being on council, and it was a big deal, like because we want to get the black testers, and I'm saying it like this because anybody who is in a city official or any police officer or the mayor, they're gonna look at it like, well, we did our due diligence by putting the test out there and going to the black leaders in the community and having them push it. And I would definitely say that I was trying to promote it. But for me, I feel like the same way we go above and beyond, there's times where I'm dead tired and I still go do stuff in the community and drag my 4 babies along with me to a bunch of stuff. They don't do their due diligence. My thing is, it's okay to ask a black leader or someone in the community to promote the test, but why are you not going to the high schools? And don't give me that crap about we got the core program and all that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the same way the colleges give the kids extra credits if they're taking advanced classes. Why can't we start with something like that? Like, meet these kids where they're at. Have the police come and let the kids look at the police in a different view. My 8-year-old wants to be a police officer, and I cringe when he says it, but it's because I keep him so I'm a mother bear, I hover over him a whole lot, so he doesn't get to see the negative part of what society is really happening. But the truth be told, he's 8. So in about the next 4 years, I got to start giving him another side of what the reality is. And that is, he's already born with 2 strikes against him. You were born male and you were born black. So I have to already prepare him. But I wanted to make that statement as far as, like, when they watch this, they're going to say, oh, we did our part. We went to the black leaders in the community to push for the test, but you didn't go above and beyond. You're not going to the schools and getting those 15-year-olds because you want to start when they're younger so they can get the idea of what this can look like. If you need college credits, start taking these classes now so you can position yourself that when you graduate from high school, you may not need that much college credits, but maybe only go another year on, and then you can get a job as a police officer. So I don't think they do their part.
Can I ask you something else along that line about children? I'm sorry, I can't remember who said we've taught our kids to fear the unknown. And I don't know how we can work on younger children so that this, the racism that we see developing, because it does develop, you're not born that way, obviously. I'm terribly concerned that what I've just heard, that a teacher was denigrating Black Lives Matter to 7th graders, but even younger than that.
Yeah.
How do we reach the children? What can we do?
Well, here's the thing. I met with the superintendent, and I know we're focused on the criminal justice process and on the chief of police and the mayor and the city council, but this is how systemic racism works, right? They're all connected, and they're also connected to the superintendent of the school. And so since June 7th, there's been a richness in our community. I have to applaud businesses and religious communities and all types of communities that I didn't even phantom would come out to make the rally for June 7th be a success, because it wasn't just Troy for Black Lives, it was us leading it, but it was our community that came out as a whole and said, how can I help? Because the mayor is telling me to broaden up and close the windows, you know, and shut down. And we were like, no, you probably could even make a little bit of money. You know what I'm saying? You might want to open up and make some quick things, you know, and offer some free water and things like that. But I think when I remember when I met with the superintendent, because we wrote a letter to him around the schools that Black children deserve. So it's the Black Lives Matter platform, but it's within the school system, right? So what is the school that Black kids deserve? And I use the model of this great work that's happening in New York City, which what is the school that Black girls deserve? Because we have to include the conversation of Black girls and Black trans children, because the connection between school and prison is increasing with all Black bodies, not just Black men. It is increasing with all Black bodies, so that Black girls are not seen as victims of harm, but as actually participants in the harm and seen as demonized as criminals. And that is increasing. And so I said to the superintendent, I gave him our demands for the school, which is a little bit different than the Troy for Black Lives demand, because it's a school setting. But it says we want the school resource officers removed. We do not need them in the school. And his response to me was that they have the police in the school because they want the little kids to develop good relationship with law enforcement. You have a chief of police that tells you that racism does not exist in his school, which is not true. I mean, in his police station, which is not true. And then you have his cops in our elementary schools doing visits, and our middle school policing the kids, harassing the kids, pulling them out of school to go to, because of parole or probation, all types of things. And I'm like, you don't need that. If that child is committing some harm doing, but took the time to go to school, that is an opportunity to save that child, not to turn them over to the detective and then reinstitute him back into that system. And so I think there's a lot that the schools district has to do around acknowledging racism as well, and beginning to really make sure that that is the one place that I do believe, because I actually don't believe that diversifying the police force is going to be the answer. But I do believe that in the school system, diversifying the teaching staff, the principal staff, the administrators will do some really good service. My husband's been a school teacher, and he's a teacher's assistant in the school district at the Learning School for over 20 years now. And one of the beautiful things is when he sees the kids on his own time, and he could see them. When Thaddeus Faison got shot, my husband was there that night, keeping the Bloods calm, because they knew him and they trusted him, while the police on the other side of the street were all dressed up in riot gear, ready to harm those kids. And those kids were grieving. They were grieving the loss of a friend. And so I know you specifically asked about the kids, but that is the one place that I believe our kids get indoctrinated to hate themselves. And I think white kids get indoctrinated to live in their privilege. And it does them all a huge, huge disservice. I can't tell you how my son's heart was broken when he had that discussion with that teacher. As far as he was concerned, it was another reminder of a school not caring about his Black life.
Can I say something to that? Education is critical, but the problem is our young people are not educated about themselves, their history, our history, who we really are. We yet are struggling with our own identity. I am a 66-year-old woman, and I'm struggling with mine. I was 13 years old before I came to appreciate being Black, because see, back in my day, the N-word was freely said, and the teachers didn't mind saying it as well. And I have to tell you what brought me to the place of loving who I was. James Brown came out with "I'm Black and I'm Proud." We went crazy. We went absolutely crazy. There's this self-hatred that was forced into our spirit. Our children are not taught, and we're as ignorant as they are. So one of the things that we've got to get past this, where our children are being made, sex education became the most powerful, most important thing to teach. But what about identity? Do you know that by the time our children, especially Black boys, are in the 3rd grade, this has been proven that we lose them, and that the penal system, that they were building prisons based on how many Black males were in school in 3rd grade. They knew how to approximate the amount of prisons that were going to be needed. Now, I'm telling you, this is a fact. This was proven. Our young Black males lose themselves. They start kindergarten enthused. By the time they're in the 3rd grade, we've lost them. Something's happening in the educational system, back to systemic racism, where they're being taught by predominantly white teachers who have no understanding of the child, that the child is not palatable to their will. And so there's something wrong with that child, not that he's an individual, but there's something very wrong with him, and he needs to be on Ritalin, and he needs this and he needs that. And that kind of thing, racism, butt naked racism, has been one of the forces that's causing us to lose our children. So once again, it's not just the police department, but our educational system does target Black males. And what it is, God only knows, but it does target Black males.
Thank y'all for this. I was actually, you guys are touching a little bit about what I think we're all going towards. And the trans-theoretical model is something that I rely on. And it's something that I think every person who is dealing with the condition of trying to change the mental processes around systematic racism, and also educating young people. I spent years as a youth media specialist for the AIDS Council, and I've done plenty of work in the Albany area around formerly incarcerated men who are coming back into the world and trying to get right. And so the trans-theoretical model really focuses on pre-contemplation, contemplation, not aware or uninformed in intention to change, aware of the problems that exist and are thinking about changing. And preparation is another piece where you're talking about the intention to take action and to change. And so you can Google that, and there'll be like 20 different models that'll pop up in ways that you can explain this. And we're talking to the mayor, we're talking to the police chief, and we're talking to common council. Everybody needs to get on code when it comes to the trans-theoretical model, because it's understanding that maybe these cops, if they have to be monitoring behavior, they're not coming in police clothing. They're coming in plain clothing. And they're not just showing up when bad things happen. They're handing out awards. They're there at basketball games to assist with the coaching, or they are around. They're around at all points in these young people's lives, so they don't just see them when shit hits the fan. They're seeing them at their best moments, so they can understand where the fall off happened, right? And so I do understand that we would love to not have them involved at all, but the unfortunate part is we need to get acquainted with each other so we see each other as humans, right? So we have to see them at all 5 or 6 of these phases to understand truly where we need to help them at, and understand that they may relapse and go back and fall because a family member passed away. So it's not. And we need to have a system, not just the police there to assist them. Maybe we see the police 4 or 5 steps down, but the first couple of interactions should never be with police. You know what I'm saying? It should always be with a community member who has an established nonprofit organization or an LLC that is being funded properly by the government, by the federal agencies that dole out money to organizations that don't resemble the community. And so that is also, I mean, it plays into all of those things. The trans-theoretical model, I think, is something that everybody should adopt.
You know, there is a term that you used, Deshaun, when you were first talking about this. You talked about the looking for an infrastructure of systemic inclusion, I think you said, because systemic economic inclusion is not something that we see. And I'm wondering to what extent this really, you know, we're talking at a certain level about people's hearts, but we're also talking about the very practical economic force that bears down upon communities of color, aren't we? Is there a sense that that a more just economic system could make much of a difference, or does it begin somewhere else? Where, I guess I'm asking, where does the economic solution come into this?
Well, I think people cringe whenever we talk about sorry, I'm blinking. I think when we're talking about our 40 acres and a mule, when we're talking about getting our money, where we're talking about getting the health accepted. I was just talking to Luz today. We need to really separate ourselves and heal. We haven't been able to heal from any of our situations. So we're talking about a stimulus package, like the, you know, hotels and the airport systems were given to boost the economy. Black people need a boost in their economy just to get even Steven. We're talking about paying back our loans. We're talking about getting out of debt. We're talking about getting our slate clean when it comes to credit. You know what I'm saying? Where we can own houses and own cars and not have to, you know, have delinquencies on our license because we're just trying to make ends meet. A lot of the situations where we have to encounter the police officers is because we trying to get right. We're trying to get to the money,
right?
So we can pay our back due tickets. So now you have probable cause to pull me out my car, and now everything hits me. Everything hits me. Why am I being stopped? There was no reason for me to be stopped. Now we're talking, so now there's an altercation, but you don't understand even the basis of why I'm feeling my way. So now we have an altercation, and now I'm puffing my chest out, and you don't know how to de-escalate because you don't understand anything that I have to go through on a daily basis. And so, yes, it's economics. It's absolutely. We're talking about reparations is what we're talking about.
Reparations.
I'll say it last because when we're talking about it first, people stop listening, right? So when we're talking about reparations, we're talking about real economic stimulus package that's going to help us like take the knife out of our back and bandage it up and give us some time so it can heal. It hasn't, the wound is still open.
And I think this current moment of reckoning of Black Lives Rising is also not just questioning the reality of white systemic racism, right? But it's also pushing up against capitalism and a capitalist society that was founded on Black bodies, right? And so the reason law enforcement was developed was to capture the slaves because that was someone's property. And if they lost them, that meant lots of money that they would lose. And so there's a connection and a huge connection between racism, capitalism, as well as sexism and ableism. And that's why I keep on interjecting that this is no longer something that we could just talk about under the guise of this is happening to Black men only. This is also happening to Black women. There's a large percentage of women who are sexually abused by police officers, Black trans communities by police officers. And so, but back to the economic piece, capitalism is very connected to this. And we're seeing that wall and questioned for the first time in the history of movement in this country. You know, when you go back and you look and you study the Black Panther movement, they were talking about capitalism, but we never really saw it that way. We saw it as talking about, you know, Black freedom movement, right? We see it in the Combahee River Collective. I mean, they were very intersectional when they talked about the what was happening to Black women in the 70s in Boston, and they were being killed by police officers, right? So I'm just making this connection because economics is not going to solve this in the same way diversity is not going to solve this. This is a larger, complex issue that demands a very intricate strategic analysis where we make ourselves vulnerable. It would have been nothing for that chief of police to say, yes, it does exist, and I'm embarrassed. It would be nothing for the mayor, Madden, to say, we screwed up on June 7th, just like we screwed up when we stood there and we stayed quiet till this day. Till this day, the city is fighting in a civil lawsuit against Dominique and Edson Thevin and his family. Well, if we're not in a racist society, let that go. Tell them they were right and let it go. Stop the defense, right? There's millions of dollars that poor Troy, who doesn't have a lot of money, is always paying because of the police brutality that Jessica spoke to, right? And so, you know, I just had to sort of edge that in there because I know we're getting close to a close and I can't leave here without sitting here because I don't know who's going to watch this. I don't know who's going to listen. They're probably saying, Luz, calm down. We have been working in Troy since 2017, and you heard Jessica for like 30 years. Some of us are tired. We played every rule by the city council's game. We played every rule by the mayor's game. We even played every rule by the district attorney's office. And nothing. June 7th comes, they get scared. They tell all our business people in our communities to get scared. And the joke was on them. Why? Because we're very much connected to our community. We went to we knocked on every door and we said, this is what we're doing. And this is what we're doing it. And this is how, and here's different ways you can participate. And the majority of them showed up for Black lives in a way I've never seen. And so if these leaders don't wake up and pay attention to that,
Can I say something?
we're going to the voting booth next year. And we're going to do to them just like what we're doing to Trump.
Can I say something in regards to the economics? Our young mothers, unfortunately, the extended family is missing for so many of our young people. They've moved from various cities. They've come to Troy. I'm speaking primarily of Troy because this is where I am, and I see it. And I see that they're missing the extended family, grandma and auntie, and all those individuals that would help you with your child and childcare. So these young mothers are working 12 and 16-hour shifts. Now be reminded that they have children, minor children, who, as a result of them having to work all those hours, are without parenting or adult supervision. So when we speak of economics, these individuals are working so hard and so many hours because they're not being paid what they should be paid. And so economics is playing a major role in children being deprived of the parent or parents. The rent is ridiculous in these homes that these slumlords have. I've seen some unbelievable places where the rent that these mothers and fathers were having to pay just to stay out of the cold, and it's criminal. And our city does not address those matters. So there are tons of issues, but economics, where our parents or these young parents are forced to work very long, hard hours just to put food on the table, is one of the things that's contributing. And again, when I see children riding their bikes 10 and 11 o'clock at night during the summer months, I know that the parents, oftentimes there's this assumption that they're somewhere drinking beer and getting high. Those
Mhm.
parents are working themselves to death because they're forced to work those kinds of hours because of the economy, because they're not being paid what they should be paid. And thank God, President elect Biden will address the minimum wage issue. But that is one of the things that's terrible, affecting these young families adversely.
There's another point, and I would be sad if I didn't say this, and that's the benefit cliff. And the benefit cliff goes like this. I'm busting my behind, I'm working a bunch of hours, and I'm qualified for certain things right now, but let me make $2 over or a penny over, and now I lose my benefits. So guess what? That means I lose my child care services because DSS is not going to pay if I'm making money. That means I don't have food stamps because DSS ain't going to give me food stamps if I have it. And I'm speaking for someone, I can speak for myself. I had to figure it out. 4 children, and me and my husband just moving from Brooklyn, New York. This was all brand new. So I used the system for what I had to use it for. But let me tell you something. It's a struggle when you don't qualify for nothing no more. And when you're trying to make ends meet, and when go back to what Deshaun was saying about, people getting arrested, when you have to pick between, do I get my car inspected or do I put food on the table? Those are things that we deal with on a daily basis. So when you're a teacher and you're working with a kid and you're wondering why they're so aggressive, because maybe that child didn't even get a chance to eat in the morning because they had to rush out because their mom got a 7 to 3 shift or a 7 to 7 shift, because we all know a lot of our people are home health days or CNAs, and they don't even get the chance to even become an LPN or RN because they don't have the time to be able to go to school, work, and take care of their children. So those are things that I will be so sad not to say. That benefit cliff is a major issue. The system needs to start giving people some kind of leeway. Give them 6 to 12 months to figure it out, making this extra money, because a lot of times the extra money is not even extra money because you're taking it out in my taxes anyway.
Yeah,
So I have to say that.
that's really real, and it's really important. And I'm so glad you shared it. My father-in-law had an experience recently. I don't know if you all are hearing that noise.
Yeah, there is some interference, some noise coming in. Somebody needs to.
Yeah, folks might want to just mute their lines. But my father-in-law, about 5 years ago, I don't know how public housing found out that he got an extra pension check or something extra, and they increased his rent retroactively. And he lives in public housing. He's an 87-year-old man who's worked very hard to raise 3 kids, him and his wife, and they increased it. So the elderly in this town, especially the Black elderly in this town who worked during a time of industrial work when that are suffering just as well.
Housing is notorious for that, Luz. Housing is notorious for raising your rent. I know.
Oh, yeah. That's what I'm saying. That's literally my point. It's exactly what I'm saying. Public housing increased it, and then they went retroactive on him. And he's not the only one. And currently, there's supposed to be a moratorium on evictions because of the impact of COVID economically on communities across this country, primarily on Black, Indigenous, and people of color. I already know of 2 evictions. 2 evictions in Troy, more so than we see in Albany and Schenectady. And you're going to tell me racism doesn't exist? Classism doesn't exist? I know you didn't ask about class and all of that, but they're all very interconnected. These are both Black single moms with children being evicted. In this moment of COVID, it's going to be 0 below soon. I don't know when, because people also don't believe in climate, the environmental issues. And so, we're seeing weather that we're not even used to, but it's going to get cold soon. So where are they to go? And by the way, you have to pay $10 a night to go to Joseph's house, unless it's deemed too cold, and then everyone is allowed in for free. So tell me again that I'm not connected to my community.
Rex said something earlier about the education, and I wanted to make sure I say this too. Black teachers should not be considered the dumping ground because white teachers don't know how to handle them. The reason why it's like 12 reasons why we don't really have a lot of Black teachers, and that's part of the reason. The politics of that Black teachers have to deal with. They want to go to work and they want to be able to have diversity, and that's not fair. And then they always pay Black teachers less money than they'll pay a white teacher, and it is not fair. They assume that Black teachers can relate because they look like the child, but you don't know where that Black teacher came from. She may not have grown up in poverty. So why should she have to be the dumping ground for every Black child? Those are things that people need to wake up and realize. And that happens in the city of Troy. And that's part of the reason why we don't have many Black teachers.
Mhm. Well, I wish, the question that was asked earlier, I don't know who's going to watch this, you said, and I think that's a good question, but I wish we had an awful lot of people watching. I wish we could get a great audience for this, and maybe we will, but I think this has been an important conversation, and I'm sensitive to the fact that, as I think Jessica said at one point, I'm exhausted from talking about all of this, she said, and I'm sure you are. But I really thank you for taking the time. We've gone over time because what you were saying was so important, that it is essential for people to hear and for us to understand. There are a lot of people to thank. The New York State Writers Institute and Center for Law and Justice came up with this idea. Times Union and WMHT are co-sponsors. Special thanks to the Justice Center of Rensselaer County, and particularly in that regard to the very resilient and resourceful Bob Blackman for all of his help in getting this project forward. But especially to you who are participating, who are seen on this screen here, thank you for participating and for advancing, I hope, through dialogue, our shared hope of realizing a more just and fair community for all. So thank you.